Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Moon. The Garage Gym Athlete Podcast is a result of my desire to build better humans, unequivocal coaches, and autonomous athletes. I've spent the last several years obsessing over program design, nutrition, and every other way you can optimize human performance. This podcast distills the latest scientific research with what I've learned and blends it with the not-so-scientific field of mental toughness. We are here to build you into a dangerously effective athlete. If you enjoy this podcast, you can find out more about our training at garagegymathlete.com. And if you want to pursue more into the field of coaching and programming, head to endof3fitness.com. Thanks for listening. All right. So the new intro, what do you think, man?
I think it's great. It's always a good change of pace, freshen things up a little bit.
Yeah.
Make sure people are listening. Make sure that they notice the small things. So
we do have the new intro for anyone listening. You just heard it, but a couple things for the people who listen regularly. So it is new. We feel like we needed a new one to I don't know. We changed up what the podcast was, right? And so we needed a new intro to reflect that versus the old intro. But we made it strategically almost exactly 60 seconds. So if you're like, man, I don't want to listen to the intro every time because it's a minute long, you just double tap, at least on the iPhone, which we know most of our listeners are on Apple. You hit the 30-second fast forward 2 times, and you should be right at where the podcast starts. That was strategic in nature. So
it's not often you give people permission to skip.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're a regular listener, this will be the only time I mention it too. You don't need to hear me talk about what the podcast is every single time. And a lot of our listeners already subscribe to Garage Gym Athlete Programming too, so they don't need to be sold on that either. They're just here to get the content and get on with their day in an awesome fashion. All right. So what are we doing today? We have something pretty new. We'll get into updates after this, but we went to Spartan Media Fest in Lake Tahoe, California, which is really awesome. And so we kind of have a new episode back to me interviewing. Joe was a part of it as well, interviewing people, which I haven't done since the Better Humanology days. If a lot of people listening were listening to the Better Humanology podcast when that was still going on. So I had to, brush off some of those skills and bring them back. So we interviewed Robb Wolf, and that's who we're talking to today. But it was a lot of fun. We interviewed quite a few people. You'll be hearing them sparsed out over the rest of the year, on top of us, intermingling some of our typical episodes where we go over study a topic and the Meet Yourself Saturday workout. But for today, we're just going to kind of get started with this. But it's been a while, man. We published the webinar as an episode, and then we published season 9, which was awesome. And so we haven't given any updates in a while about what's going on with us. So I'm going to start with you, man. Give me an update. How's life been? I don't know, since I feel like it's been a month since we recorded a legitimate episode.
Yeah, lots happened. The news cycle's going on, currently week 2, and we are doing all kinds of new stuff, and the body feels it in, sore ways and good ways and every kind of ways. There's some things that definitely not used to that are super challenging, and some other things that don't feel as challenging, but it's all feeling great. It's a great balancing cycle.
So you're finding out where you were unbalanced and where maybe you don't need as much balance. Basically,
yes. I found out that ring row holds are the hardest thing in the world, and I wasn't expecting that.
They are pretty difficult.
Yeah. So I said, I think I need to do some more bicep curls or something, curls for the girls.
And they're in there. They're in the programming.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. So looking out. I also just this past week we bought a spin bike. No, I did not get a Peloton. No matter how many times that people told me, "Oh, just get a Peloton." No, we got a spin bike.
I can tell you that.
I mean, yeah. There was the only helpful person that gave a legit suggestion was Emily.
My Emily?
Yes.
What'd she say?
I forgot what company it was, but it's almost like a competitor to Peloton. They're a little bit cheaper, but similar business models.
Oh yeah. Our my sister-in-law, her sister has one. That's probably the one that she recommended. I forgot the brand as well, but yeah, it seemed pretty legit. That's the one she wanted to get, and then I was like, yeah, but how about this Concept 2 biker?
Yeah, Concept 2, right? Yeah. Okay, you win.
All right, cool. So do you know what the one you got is, the name of it?
High, I think PYHIGH, something like that. I checked a bunch of reviews, and there's actually a site that reviews a bunch of spin bikes and comparing and contrasting for like the cheaper models. And it was also a lightning deal at the time, so I got it was $125 off, which was like 20% or 23% off or something like that. So it was a pretty good deal, and it's supposed to be really awesome quality. So I'm just waiting for it to come in now.
No, so it hasn't arrived yet.
No, it was supposed to arrive, but then I think too many people ordered it and it got delayed like 4 days. And I'm kind of sad about it because it's a rest day and I'd really like to do a bike right now, but I can't.
Well, next time, man. Next time we record, we'll have to have the official like, okay, how are you liking the thing? Yeah. So we'll get that update
together.
Cool. Anything else going on?
No, I don't think so. Balancing and the new bike were the main things.
Yeah, so for me, about same. I mean, we went to Spartan Media Fest. I think that's a big deal. It was a lot of fun for us. To be honest, we don't do a lot of in-person stuff. We're trying to kind of break out of that mold this year. Going to Spartan Media Fest, and then in November coming up, we, getting a lot of, so not only our team, but, a lot of the Garage Gym Athlete team together in North Carolina for a race. So it's just really fun to get together and do this kind of stuff. And I hope to do more and more of it next year. But the only update I kind of wanted to talk about was just Murph in general. So Murph is still going on. This happens to me frequently where I'm like doing something, and yeah, I post on it on Instagram like once a week, but I haven't updated anybody. And I started to do, at the very beginning, I was like, I'm going to do a video per week. And then I was like, nah, I'm not a video guy. Like, this is way too much work because I have to like squeeze a Murph in between like naps, and like, it's just not, my life is not conducive to doing videos on the weekend with family life. And so quick update on Murph. It's so much different this time. I sat down the other day to really reflect on just Murph. So I did a year of Murph before, and I'm doing a year of Murph again. And I just feel like this time is so much different. I do think that I am way fitter at the start than I was the last time. So Murph just doesn't hurt as bad, is one thing I reflected on. And it's very, very hard for me to make it hurt. I'm not saying it won't. It's not like I'm immune to it, but I'm talking about from like a mental and physical standpoint. It's hard. It's hard to go that hard, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's hard to go that hard. And a lot of times I just don't want to, it's been very challenging in such a different way. That's what's so interesting about doing the year of Murph again, is like, the first time was like consistency and can I push myself to this level? And this time it's like, yeah, consistency is easy. Pushing myself is to the level I got to last time is not that challenging, but that next level is just like, that's not something I can do every week, and I don't think that
going to the dark place.
Yeah, like I don't think I should be able to, because I probably would have to recover from it for, multiple days. And so I just wanted to reflect on that. It's very interesting, and it's been really cool. But I mean, throwing down like a 30-minute Murph or whatever is not the hardest thing for me to do in the world. Murph with a vest off is like a warm-up now. It's just not challenging stuff, but it is so hard. I don't know. I'm actually a little bit frightened now. Like, I think I might crack my vested PR, but if I do, I mean, it might be like a second, which could be a rounding error. Like, it's going to be hard to get much lower than I did. And I still have plenty of time to get there. We're just now getting into the cooler temperatures where I can actually start really like pushing myself without heat, like draining my performance. So I'm excited to see where things go from here. But that's just something I was thinking about recently and wanted to share.
So you say your floor is raising, but not necessarily your ceiling.
Yeah. That's a really great way to put it. My floor is like really high, but my ceiling it's just difficult.
You can only do air squats so fast.
Well, yeah, like I should probably calculate out how fast if I wanted to do a 25-minute vested Murph. I mean, I can do sub 25 minutes with no vest, but like with a vest, how fast does it have to be? And I did run into some issues. I think if you do have followed along the story, I tweaked my knee. It wasn't significantly hurt, but I went to physical therapist for it just because I don't mess around with injuries or potential injuries, and got that all suited and squared away. But I've also been like, for that reason, I was running it a little bit slower to just make sure like my impact to the knee was like spot on. Like I wasn't doing anything detrimental. I think that's affected me a little bit in trying to get a little bit faster. But yeah, and I've been cycling so much, my running hasn't improved. That's probably where if I want to get better at Murph, I probably just need to like start running a lot again and see how fast I can get those miles. Awesome. But yeah. So that's the Murph project. If you guys didn't know about it, go to Instagram. You can find me, hashtag EO3Murph project. A lot of our athletes are doing it as well. Really cool, inspirational to see everybody else hanging on for this long. I mean, we're 30 some odd weeks in, and a lot of people are still here. Last time I did this, everyone was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And then like 10 weeks in, I was like the only one left for the rest of the year. But this time, a lot of people have hung in there and hung in there strong. So it's been really cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about Spartan Media Fest maybe a little bit and this Robb Wolf interview. And I'll kick it off by saying, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the interview, but this was literally the most full circle moment maybe of my entire career so far. I was in pilot training, kind of at the back end of finding out I was not going to be able to fly high performance aircraft anymore. But they were still keeping me involved in everything because, pilot training, much like any other like rigorous school, like medical school or whatever, if you don't stay on top of the stuff, the definition, you're not doing it every day, hand-eye coordination, all this, you're going to lose it. And so any potential for me to come back, they still had me in flight simulators and taking tests and studying and doing all these things. But it's really hard to stay motivated if they're like, we're 90% certain you don't need to be doing any of this, but we're going to make you keep doing it just in case. And so the reason I kind of tell that backstory is because I started to split my time a little bit. I was like, man, this kind of sucks. And so I had a Kindle that I put a lot of my books on from pilot training that I could, where I could study whenever I had a free moment. But then I also threw the book, The Paleo Solution by Robb Wolf on there. And I would take time and breaks. And, I just started reading his book, and this is like 10 years ago now, and going through that. And that was just such a huge transitional time period for me. I'd always been into health and fitness, but like Robb Wolf really opened my mind to clean eating and paleo and things that have shaped a lot of my life. I look at that time period from, say 2010 to 2012 for Emily and I specifically, because we didn't have any kids yet. That was just such an experimental time for us with nutrition and figuring these things out. And it was just such an awesome time period. I always like reminisce about that time period in our marriage and in my life of just all we did was learn and research about nutrition together. And it was a lot of fun, but Robb Wolf started a lot of that. So to kind of I almost feel like I kicked off my Into 3 Fitness career with reading and research right then and there. And, I just had never interviewed him, even through Better Humanology, never gotten to speak to him. We never exchanged emails, and I have with most everyone else that I've wanted to in the industry, but Robb Wolf just never was one of them. So not only getting to interview him, but getting to sit down with him, and we got to hang out with him, before the podcast. We talked to him for, an hour or whatever on the podcast, and then even afterwards. He's just such a cool guy. It was really a full circle moment for me, and just really awesome. So, I mean, that is a long story to kind of tell you about my thoughts on Robb Wolf and how it all fits together for me and why this episode specifically is such a big deal to me. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, man.
Yeah, it was definitely awesome hanging out with him, and he was super cool. Like, a lot of the time these people have, some whether assistant or somebody else with them. But he was just kind of rolling around by himself, hanging out. He'd come talk with us for a while, just super casual. It was a great time. And his book Wired to Eat was one of the first ones I read, or it wasn't the first because it came out a little bit later, but it's still one that it's still my top 3. And it's probably the most recommended book I give to somebody when they're looking for any sort of nutrition advice, because it is a great starting point, and easy to digest. The way he puts things is pretty great as well. But I think right after we were done the interview, one thing that we both kind of said was it was 45 or 50 minutes long, but we could have talked to him for hours about whatever was going on. And
for sure.
Yeah. And I wasn't even sure what direction the interview with the talk would go on, because nutrition is such a broad subject, but he touched on some really, really cool things that was a little unexpected, but it was awesome to hear. And it kind of coincided with his hydration supplement element, which he brought some for us, which is also super cool that he just brought us a free pack of that, and is delicious. And I still want to try it in a margarita.
Yeah. So he does have a new supplement company. He talks about a little bit called Element. And I won't steal his thunder. He talks about the whole reason why he's doing that and kind of how that happened. And if you know anything about my keto journey, if not, you'll hear about it in this episode a little bit too. But the importance of electrolytes, we talked about that. We talked about how to get your friends and family in nutrition, maybe if they're not as into it, and just talking about low carb in general and how different things affect different people. Because the paleo solution for me was, that was his first book and a huge, like I said, eye opener, game changer for me. But then his second book, Wired to Eat, you mentioned, I started to get frustrated because I was already coaching people in nutrition. I'd already left the military when Wired to Eat came out. This was, a few years ago, running into 3 Fitness full time, coaching people on nutrition, one-on-one, a lot more, pre-garage gym athlete scaling up. And I was just getting frustrated because I kept running into, it was all individualized coaching and just how different people are. We have phenomenal results with these 5 athletes, and there'd be one athlete who, like, just no matter what we did, like we had to work 10 different ways to figure out how to get this athlete to work. And that's when I started to realize, I'm like, this is very, like, nutrition is so individualized. Like, it's insane. And it was like right around when I started to come to that conclusion, he wrote Wired to Eat, which is almost like, it's a phenomenal explanation of all of that, of like why it's individualized and how people are different and how it affects you. But he still gives you some like basic guidelines, which most people don't do in nutrition books. They're like, oh yeah, here are my rules, follow my rules. And if anything else that anybody else says is wrong and will kill you, but what I say is right and is awesome. And he doesn't do that. He's not very dogmatic in that book. And so just a great approach and a good person to follow in that regard.
Yeah, some of the points he made about how certain things are individualized was pretty crazy. If I had to name the episode, it'd probably be How to Blow Your Mind in 30 minutes or less, or something like that.
What the episode's going to end up with the intro and the recording, it's going to be like way longer than 30 minutes. Well, yeah, but yes.
Even if you take a 30-minute segment.
Okay, I think that covers everything from this episode. You have anything else?
No, definitely take notes or just pay attention to some of the awesome stuff he drops.
Yeah, and eat your broccoli. All right, guys. Well, that's it. We're going to roll this interview with Robb Wolf. Enjoy. Robb, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, honored to be here. Thank you. I'm
really glad to have you. We were talking beforehand, like, you really were kind of the start of my journey, at least in the nutrition world. I started as a food nutrition science major in college, but then didn't agree with some of that stuff and, got into the paleo solution and everything. And so huge impact. This is a really full circle moment for me to be able to talk to you.
Awesome.
And we're going to kind of explore a lot of topics, we'll talk about some garage gym stuff, but also want to get in what you're doing, latest updates and all that good stuff. So first off, give me some background on, I would love the big picture. I know a lot of people know who you are and what you do, but I would just love to know like what your journey's been like in a nutshell for the last, decade or so, and like, bring me up to today, and then we can kind of dive in from there.
Sure. So going way back, I was a state powerlifting champion, was into Thai boxing and stuff like that. I've always been interested in human performance. Had some really significant health issues when I was beginning a graduate program. I had a background in biochemistry and was doing autoimmune and cancer-related research. And then it was unpacking that health problem that kind of got me into this whole paleo diet, ancestral health kind of orientation. Around the time that happened, I was poking around on the interwebs, and I found this thing called CrossFit, which the workouts looked kind of goofy, but they had some really cool nutrition articles, and that ended up feeding into co-founding the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world, ended up working for HQ for a number of years. And then more recently, I've been involved with kind of a interesting healthcare initiative. I'm on the board of directors of a medical clinic in Reno, Nevada. And 7 years ago, we did a pilot study with the Reno Police and Fire Department where we found folks at high risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, got them on a kind of a modified low-carb paleo-type diet, got them exercising, tried to modify their sleep as best we could. And that pilot study alone saved the city of Reno about $22 million with a 33-to-1 return on investment. So naively, I thought I was going to go in and transform all of healthcare within like 5 years. It's proven to be a little bit more challenging than that. We've had some pretty good success, but I've been motoring forward trying to figure out how to scale that kind of healthcare offering where we have some really targeted advanced testing that can tell us really what the risk profile is on somebody but then also provide some support with health coaching, functional medicine. And I'm really trying to figure out a way of addressing the payer piece. Like our current insurance system is poised for like this epic collapse.
Right,
and so I'm trying to figure out a way to put in some mechanisms to fix that and really weld it all together. I think one of the problems that most wellness programs have is they're not looking at the right stuff as a beginning. And then also people are still crushed under healthcare costs. And so how much money do they have laying around to go do advanced testing and figure out, oh, wow, I have cholesterol problems or something. And then they need to address that. So I'm trying to address all of those things. And yeah, it's been interesting. It's a great challenge, but it's been a lot of work.
For sure, man. So give me like your dream situation. Like say fast forward 10 years, you've accomplished all that. What would the healthcare system look like? What would people's health look like? Like your ultimate impact.
So part of our goal right now with the organization we're putting together, we have a goal of by 2025 having 1 million people that have stepped outside the sick care system. And the way that I would say that they're outside the sick care system is we have these people on, from a payer perspective, either something called a MediShare or a health savings account plus a catastrophic plan. And I'm sure this stuff is like super riveting for your garage gym.
Hey man, it's all in there.
But it's super important, you know? And so they have this payer piece that is addressing kind of that fundamental element of like risk exposure for an individual, for a family, what have you. But it also has some market transparency. Like if we bought tomatoes with a third-party payer system, they would be $6,000 a pound,
right.
You know?
Yeah.
So trying to create some market transparency there, but also then relying on this ability to do advanced testing that is super pinpoint, but also reasonably inexpensive to assign a risk to individuals so that we can then appropriately charge them both for the insurance coverage, but also as their health improves, that coverage premium goes down. And the spread on that would be woven back in to provide these people health coaching, functional medicine support, and ideally it's in this kind of virtuous cycle. And it would be different than the current model, which is trying to aggregate a bunch of people and fingers crossed hoping that enough people are healthy that the whole thing doesn't implode. But recent research suggested that fewer than 12% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy. So that current system without a way of aligning incentives for people to be pulled towards health, it's just not really going to work. So ideally, fast forward 5 years from now, we've got more than a million people under a program like this. And then peripheral to that, they're also getting well educated and excited about regenerative agriculture because our food systems are really where health begin.
So I want to kind of unpack. Maybe, so we're talking to, this podcast, a lot of athletes listening to it, a lot of them in control of their health to some degree. Mm-hmm. I'd say a lot more than the average American. But what we see a lot of is them asking about, hey, my dad, my spouse, right. Like, what is it? What can I do? What's the first step there? What would you recommend to those people if, what is the first step? If they think that their dad or their brother or whatever is at risk for diabetes, like what do you think their first step should be?
Man, it's a really good question. And one of the greatest challenges we face is when people go out and get, say, like a standard physical and a standard blood test where they do like total cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, fasting lipids and whatnot. It really doesn't tell you what's going on. So typically people are more confused after their blood work than before. And then also, like what we found with doing this risk analysis process with police, military, and fire, there are a ton of people that the system would say, "Oh, you look good, you're fine," and those people are actually not. And then there are other people that really are good, but their specific cholesterol numbers maybe don't look good within the orthodoxy. But when we do this advanced testing, they're actually great. And these are the people that end up getting put on statins. So we're missing people on both ends of that. And so clearly it's kind of self-serving, but I would recommend that they do something like going through the specialty health risk analysis that we offer, which is, I don't know, it's like $150 or something like that. But it really gives you this ironclad sense of where is your risk profile from the perspective of cardiovascular disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, which are really, really the biggies. And what's interesting, at least potentially with that, we've had the reason why this program was developed at all is that there were police and firefighters in particular that looked really healthy. They ran marathons, they worked out, but these were the people that died from a sudden cardiac event.
Right.
And so the hypervigilant state is a big deal, but there are also, these folks will be motoring along and they're real high motor output, but they're also on potentially a super high carbohydrate diet, super refined, and the inflammatory process that occurs from that is not good for them. Some people can thrive on that. Not everybody does. So doing a little bit of targeted risk analysis is incredibly beneficial for this. And also when people look at a number, and it's like, if we were to put a number 1 to 100, with the higher the number being, the worse it is. If somebody comes back with a number of 85, then it's like, hey man, you've got some real problems. And so, or the parent or something like that. And it becomes a leverage point, because then we can say, hey, if we can get you going to bed a little earlier, if we can get you eating some protein for breakfast instead of just like a bowl of cereal, and we do 2 or 3 kind of lifestyle interventions, we're going to recheck you in 3 months. And if you are now at a 25, your likelihood of dying just dropped by like 80%, and is that valuable to you? And typically people are like, fuck yeah, it is, So yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge when people are looking at going out and trying to help the people around them. I do think it's kind of almost like what they say on the airline, if the cabin depressurizes, put on your own mask first and then help somebody else. You got to get your own self squared away. And I think that there's almost kind of a moral obligation to try to help folks, and you don't want to be a busybody about it, but we have some, if you're into any of this kind of paleo, CrossFit, ancestral health stuff, even just peripherally, you have some really amazing information that could save a lot of lives and could really improve the lives of a lot of people. That is where doing a little bit of motivational interviewing, whether you're a professional at it or just kind of like armchair, like figuring out where is this person on the spectrum of like readiness for change. And if there's some readiness for change, then you can kind of launch into that. And then beyond that, you kind of just have to say, well, I want a good relationship with this person. I don't want to piss them off and estrange them.
Digging them and like, yeah. That's where, I mean, I kind of feel like that's where I find myself a lot of times, is like that fine line of like pestering someone, that you really care about, but at the same time not trying, but you just know how important it is, being in this field. It's hard to not want to be super passionate about letting people know.
And the cool thing is, if you can convince people to modify their sleep, exercise, food a little bit in this direction for 30 days, typically the return on investment is incredible. Usually people get 30 days into it and they're like, okay, that wasn't that hard, and I look, feel, and perform way better. And so I don't need to be perfect with this, but if I just make some little changes here and there, then it makes a massive effect in the long run.
Yeah, and I think some of so going from the Paleo Solution to Wired to Eat, there were a lot of, both amazing books, but the Wired to Eat had a lot of practical, like let's dial in your sleep, and that's really helpful, really beneficial. I'd like to also know about your kind of journey on low carb, so going all the way back to paleo, and I think, to me, maybe to you as well, it's all kind of the same. Like but like now we're using new terms and like keto, and there's fasting and all this stuff. So tell me a little bit about your journey there and how that's gone.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm definitely a lumper. So for me, this stuff's all the same stuff, whereas other people get like religiously like within the keto scene, you have people that are in like religious wars over, is it 30 grams a day or 50 grams a day that defines ketosis? And it's like, well, it depends. So that's why this is ridiculous to split hairs over. But, the funny thing is, the first foray into, I guess, kind of low carb ancestral eating was an Atkins book, which I read. And people aren't aware, like he wrote a lot about like GI issues, autoimmune issues. Like it's always been associated with just kind of general weight loss. But he was super early into saying, hey, I think there's some autoimmune problems that are addressed by removing some of these refined foods. So I've always felt better at that kind of lower carb, peri-ketogenic space. So even though I was the paleo guy, and the paleo diet tended to recommend higher carbs than what is generally recommended within keto land, if folks look back at my first book, I recommended about 50 grams of total carbohydrate a day, and that was the beginning point, and run that for 30 days and then reintroduce foods, and we'll tinker and see how you go from there. So it's interesting. My journey, I've played around with trying to reintroduce more carbs. I've done all kinds of like attempts at repairing my gut and all this stuff. And in Wired to Eat, I got to do some experiments with my wife, and she's 40 pounds lighter than I am, but I would eat a cup of rice. She would eat a cup of rice. My blood sugar would go to 200. Hers would go to 105.
Right.
And I would feel like shit afterwards, sometimes for like a couple of days. And this was spurred by some research that came out of the Weizmann Institute out of Israel, which it suggested that from person to person, like a given carb may produce favorable or unfavorable blood glucose responses. And it was just all over the map. Like there really wasn't a rhyme or reason to it. And so you really have to get in and kind of test that stuff a little bit. So on a personal side, I kind of found what worked for me 20 years ago, and I've tinkered with trying to do other things, and it just doesn't really work that well. And so it's this kind of lower carb, peri-ketogenic area. More recently, I figured out that for most of that time I was under supplementing sodium and electrolytes. And so that was something that like 3 years ago, I finally kind of fixed that piece. But for the clinical piece, like working within our medical clinic, figuring out some ways of triaging people and then kind of providing a reset, which goes back again to kind of like that 30-day paleo diet as a beginning point. And then let's experiment with carbs. Let's experiment with a little bit of intermittent fasting or earlier time-restricted feeding where we stick most of the calories early in the day and stuff like that. Like there are a lot of cool tools that you can bury people with too many details. But as they get a little bit of forward progress and based off what their goals are, we can say, hey, maybe we do 2/3 of your calories at breakfast, and then we divide up the remaining 1/3, and the bulk of that is at lunch. And then because you have family, then we have a token dinner, but just front-loading calories can end up being really remarkably impactful for people. And it's really easy too. And oftentimes they find that they don't need to be as diligent on their macronutrient breakdown. Like maybe they can handle a few more carbs by doing a protocol like that.
Yeah, I think that's been huge for me personally. Like having the just like whether it's 6 or 8 hours, that eating window.
Right.
I feel like I can be a little bit more not as strict, which know being into health and fitness for so long, I've done some really strict for a long time. So it's nice to have a little bit more flexibility. Yeah. And where I've found it's just really difficult for me. So I did keto last year, but maintaining that strict discipline. So I'd like to know is there anyone that you wouldn't recommend keto for? And then also, I would love to dive into some of the electrolyte stuff too for people who are talking about.
It's funny, like 4 years ago, I would have been much more, a couple of caveats there. So what determines keto is a really, there's a rheostat to it. Like there's a big spectrum to it. Somebody that's insulin resistant, sedentary, it's a very low carb intervention. Somebody that's fat adapted and a high motor output like a CrossFit gamer, or we're at the Spartan Media Fest right now, so there's a bunch of Spartan race people around. Their motor output is so high, they may consume 200 grams of carbs a day and they're still in ketosis the bulk of the time. So what constitutes ketosis can be a really broad spectrum depending on the individual. But 4 years ago, I would have been more reticent in recommending keto for women, for anybody with like thyroid condition or something like that. And then as I really became well educated on the electrolyte topic, which my friends Tyler Cartwright and Luis Villaseñor, they're the founders of Keto Gains, they looked at what I was doing and they said, man, you are really deficient in electrolytes, specifically sodium. And I was like, no, man, I salt my food. I'm good. And they're my coaches. So what do you do with your coach? You ignore them, of course. Clearly, you're not going to, take the advice of the people you're paying. So a year goes by and finally, like I had always had problems doing jujitsu and having that kind of low gear. And then when I finally really addressed that sodium piece in particular in the electrolyte story, it was literally like a light switch was flipped. And so most of what gets attributed to problems with some sort of a low carb intervention, hair loss, thyroid issues, people call it adrenal fatigue, but it's probably more accurately termed like HPTA axis dysregulation, but whatever term you want to call. When you look at the mechanisms of what's going on with those situations and you look at what sodium and electrolytes solve, we could probably make a credible case that, and just for a little bit of background, when you eat lower carb, you tend to have lower insulin levels, so you tend to retain sodium less. So arguably your daily need for sodium likely rises. And there was a recent a scientific paper that looked at sodium intake in type 2 diabetic heart patients. And what was interesting, there was kind of a U-curve with that. Highest morbidity and mortality was at the recommended levels of sodium intake, which is at or below 2 grams a day. And it was a very steep curve. Like the lower your sodium intake, the worse things were. Lowest morbidity mortality was at 5 grams a day, which also happens to be the beginning recommended level for ketogenic diets if you're in a ketogenic diet from like a dietitian or a doctor if you're managing epilepsy. And then you had to get out to almost 10 grams of sodium a day in type 2 diabetic heart patients to be as likely to suffer morbidity and mortality as 2 grams a day. So you were much more risk exposed taking in too little sodium than too much. And then if you cruise over to the ACSM, American Council of Sports Medicine guidelines for athletes consuming sodium, hot, humid environments, high work output, their beginning levels are 7 to 10 grams per day. And that's with it assumed to be like a high carb fueled individual, which their sodium needs are going to be lesser than a lower carb fueled individual. And we see people that consume 15 to 20 grams of sodium a day. And so when we look at table salt, it's actually only 40% sodium by weight. So we're talking about actually a remarkable amount of sodium, and we're assuming that we're getting potassium, magnesium, and calcium through a well-formulated whole foods type diet. And I know I bounced around a lot on that stuff, but the number of people that I would recommend against a ketogenic diet now are far fewer, and it usually boils down to if they want to use it for whatever reason, and by no means is keto like the ultimate tool. And this is, again, kind of a funny thing within the story. Keto has become so popular, and it's become really popular even within scientific circles because it has a very quantifiable endpoint. Are you in ketosis or not? Whereas like paleo is super nebulous. Like, what does that mean? Like, is it, Katavan type paleo where it's 70% carbs from sweet potatoes, or is it Inuit type paleo? Whereas keto, it really lends itself to scientific research much better for that kind of reductionist approach. So it's getting a ton of attention scientifically, which means then it gets a ton of attention from the media perspective and everything. But people forget that there's this whole spectrum of lower carb, that runs 100, 150, 200 grams a day, depending on the individual. And for a lot of people, that's an amazing improvement off of what they were experiencing at like a 600, 800 grams of carbs a day intake. And there are other people that consume that level of carbs and they crush it, and that's where they should be.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I noticed when I went into ketosis. I was doing more what you were talking about earlier, like just trying to follow the rules. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to go 20 grams of carbohydrate a day. It just absolutely would not support my training. But I went into ketosis really fast, on the strips and everything. And I was like, okay, well, this is cool. And then I just started to play with that. Like, how many carbohydrates can I consume and still be in ketosis? And it was quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like, I was surprised by
you're lean, you're active, you carry a lot of muscle mass. And so like depending on your activity that day, it might be 200 or 250 grams of carbs.
Yeah, which I think is phenomenal. And that's like the upper limit for a lot of people, for like they would never want to consume that much if they're more in the lower carbohydrate mindset. And one thing that helped me a ton was just listening to you. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do keto. I'm just gonna listen to Robb no matter what. And so I started like really increasing my electrolyte intake. I was kind of doing the at-home brew that we discussed earlier, and it just helped me a ton. And you kind of already hit on, so it may not be, some of the issues with keto may not be, hey, a lack of carbohydrates, it's probably electrolytes. And so you've worked in, I'd love to hear about your new product. We have some sitting here on the table. What led you to this, maybe the specific amounts, and why should people be considering that, and how much?
Yeah. So the product's called Element. We developed it. So you were one of the people that ended up doing the homebrew deal. So we saw this problem with inadequate electrolytes. And when we looked at about 200, 300 meal plans of people following basically like a Ketogains approach, or like my Keto Masterclass approach, which is basically recommending the Ketogains macronutrient ratios. When we ran that through Nutrition Analyzer, stuck all that in an Excel spreadsheet, and we looked specifically at sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, people were great on calcium. They were pretty good on magnesium. They weren't that bad on potassium, actually, because they were eating a lot of like low carbohydrate, high fiber vegetables and whatnot. But sodium was super deficient. Like that was a pretty big hole, because when people tend to eat unprocessed food, most of the processing is where sodium occurs. And so the formulation was built around plugging a hole in what is assumed to be an otherwise well-formulated diet. The goal with this thing is not to try to make up for eating a terrible diet. So we also don't add any glucose to it. There's a really big conception out in the world that you have to have glucose as a sodium co-transporter, but proteins, butyrate, beta-hydroxybutyrate all act as co-transporters for sodium uptake. There's other ways of getting sodium in the system, and we actually supplement more sodium than potassium because, again, we're assuming that there's a significant amount of potassium coming out of your diet. And if you want to turn somebody's heart off, then giving them a massive bolus of potassium is the way that you do it. Like lethal injection is actually a big bolus of potassium, which is also why the FDA tends to regulate potassium supplements very strictly, because it actually can be quite dangerous. The forgiveness level on sodium is massive compared to the danger zone that one can get into on potassium. So initially we identified this problem. We put together a pretty nifty like homebrew kit. You know, it's like put this much of this and that much of that, and you can make a liter of it and it'll have these ratios. And then we started getting social media posts where people are like, hey guys, TSA didn't appreciate like the 3 bags of white powder, you know? And we started asking ourselves, I wonder if, you know, some sort of a ready to drink, you know, stick pack type deal might be valuable. But I honestly like sat on this thing for like a year before we acted on it, because I was like, it's just fucking salt. Like I don't know, but people were really benefiting from the homebrew version. And so we put this product together. The first flavor that we released was citrus salt, and the way that we formulated it, if it failed as an electrolyte supplement, we were going to pivot it and rebrand it as a margarita base. And so we formulated the flavor as like this incredible margarita base, and like it's been incredibly popular. Like we just became the official hydration sponsor for USA Weightlifting. We've had amazing buy-in within Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA circles. We actually are right on the cusp of initiating a women's health-oriented study via Vanderbilt University. And I can't get into details on that, but we found a subsection within the women's health story that is so important and appears to really benefit from the type of electrolyte supplementation that we're doing. Now, it's completely anecdotal right now. That's why we're doing the study. But I mean, the results were so jaw-dropping that the head of the epidemiology department at Vanderbilt is like, yeah, let's absolutely do this. So people will say a million anecdote is still not evidence, but fuck, at some point, you know, like if I drop a hammer on your foot, it's like we have a fairly predictable outcome with that, even though no RCT has been done on it. So it's a long drawn out deal with the Element gig. People can check that out at drinkelement.com. And we have all kinds of support information on there about why we did what we did, kind of the genesis story behind the product.
And there's no sugar in it? Is that
no sugar in it?
Yeah. It's interesting. He had one last night. Like there was some electrolyte supplement got stuffed in his bag or whatever. He just poured it in some water and then drank it. And then he's like,
It's really sweet.
And it had like, was it 15 grams?
11
grams of sugar. Yeah. And I was like, oh,
in one little glass.
Why did that have to be shoved in there? So I think that's awesome. It's just good to, when people are like you know, putting together products who are like-minded with our typical like nutrition ideas and everything like that. I think it's really cool.
And you know, just really quickly on the reason why we didn't put any glucose or dextrose in there. There are other co-transporters that can bring the sodium into the body. The body can actively transport sodium in. And also, we wanted to do something that was as broadly applicable to as many people as possible without making assumptions. And so these products, typically they have like 10, 15 grams of glucose in there. That might work for some folks, or it might be way too much for others, or completely inadequate for a whole other group of people. And so like for myself, when I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I might, if it's a bunch of so we do our drilling, and I'll usually have about a half of one of these in 16 ounces of water. Then when we get done with the drilling, I look at who's in class. And if it's a bunch of old beat up has-beens like me, then it's like, I don't even need any glucose with this. I'll do a little bit more electrolyte and I'm good. If it's a bunch of like 24-year-old cops that don't have a neck and they just basically are like torso and hips, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to have like 20 grams of glucose before that. And I'll have it with the electrolytes. So when we were thinking about this stuff, it was like every amount of carbs that we could have put in there seemed like it was going to not serve someone else. So we looked on Amazon and like glucose powder is something like $2 a pound. So we're like, let other people do it. And what I actually do is the glucose tabs that you get in the diabetic section of the pharmacy.
Yeah, like CPS, whatever.
Yeah, so like I can actually dose that independent of the electrolytes. And so that was where we didn't want to shackle. A lot of people on social media are like, you guys are idiots. Why didn't you put, glucose in there? It's like, dude, we actually did think this through, and it's actually more freeing and liberating than like shackling you to like just a specific 11 grams in there. Yeah.
I think that's awesome because and especially if you're doing some sort of event or whatever where you would need a good amount of these,
right.
You don't necessarily need that sugar hit every single time.
Or maybe you need way more.
Yeah.
And like we can't do an infinite number of varieties on these things, And so instead of arbitrarily trying to pick some middle ground that serves nobody, why not just provide the thing that people really need, which is the electrolytes, and then they can tinker and fiddle with it. Like some people, really long duration activities, they benefit from a glucose fructose mix because of restoring hepatic glycogen levels and stuff like that. We can't address that in a low SKU offering. Like we'll end up with like 80 SKUs of things, and then people are confused. Should I do this? Should I do that? Whereas in this scenario, if somebody wants a glucose fructose mix, then we recommend they use honey and get some of the other nutritional benefits out of that. So that was the reason why we took that path. But it's funny, man. Like people have been cranky about that. It's weird. It's very interesting, but it's social media too.
Yeah,
so like,
people are very dogmatic about like
right.
a lot of different things. Or
right.
We always have a joke about not to like throw him under the bus specifically, but like we get a lot of like we talk a lot about programming and stuff, and sometimes like people will fight us on our ideas or whatever. And I'm like, well, what's your expertise? Like, what are you arguing for? Like, well, I don't actually have any background, and I don't do this for a living, but, I'm not an expert, but I did listen to a Joe Rogan podcast last night. Like, it's like they got the information from somewhere, someone said it, but they didn't fully dive in enough to know, like, what the true, roots of the problem are.
This is the amazing, not to digress on this, but it's the amazing opportunity and also the curse of the internet and social media. People are buried under information. So like if you put ketogenic diet into Google, you get 1 million hits in less than a second. If you put it into YouTube, there's a 500,000 returns there. That's awesome. And people will say, well, I shouldn't have to pay for like a program like the Keto Masterclass or something like that, or programming. There's all this free stuff. By all means, knock yourself out. But if you're not getting where you want to go, then I don't know, go out on a limb and say maybe grabbing a coach or grabbing a course that like has tens of thousands of people that have gone through it and have vetted this stuff out. With YouTube, I could figure out how to replumb my whole house, but
right.
It would be a fucking shit show. It would cost me more money in the long run. And I just find a lot of people, like the people that are really successful in not just one area, but multiple areas, they figure out their relative area of genius, and then they pay people for virtually everything else. But it's the people that try to be like the jack of all trades and are like, oh, I'm not going to pay a guy to do that. I'm going to go figure it out. Good on you. Like that, learning how to lay tile and stuff can be amazing. You can also lose a finger, and there's all this other stuff you could have done that you were actually really good at. You know?
It's an opportunity cost, like what you could have done with your time. Like people ask me all the time, like why pay for programming? I'm like, I absolutely can change my own oil. Like I'm capable of that. I know how to do it. I've done it multiple times, but I prefer going to a shop and having someone do it quickly and correctly and, saving my time. And maybe it costs a little bit more, but like they know what they're doing. They're experts. It's going to be right. And I'm not going to make a mistake or drop the car on me if, I'm trying to get underneath for the oil filter or something like that.
Yeah. And I still pay for programming from John Wellborn, who's been managing my stuff. And what he recommends has barely changed over the 10-year period he's been stewarding me on this stuff. I mean, like, you look at today versus it's like, it's almost identical, but he'll check in with me and like, based off what I'm up to, if I've got a big training block of jujitsu coming on or whatever. But part of that is just kind of like the accountability and also offloading that responsibility. Like, I make decisions all day long. By 7:30 in the morning, I've already hit decision fatigue. I have kids, I have a wife, I have multiple businesses. I'm on the board of directors of a medical clinic. Like, I don't want to make another fucking decision like the rest of my life. And so it's like, oh, I can offload my programming. And then Tyler and Luis, in theory, I'm a really, well-steeped biochemist who understands ketogenic diet. You know what? They manage my food, not me. And when I started doing that stuff, like it just freed up this psychic bandwidth that I could put into my family, into activities I wanted to do. And that's where what you guys are doing is so incredibly powerful, because it's interesting in this life cycle of the kind of garage gym. Like, originally people kind of went into the garage gym, then they thought about commercializing it. And then with the commoditization of the commercial facility, they still wanted a place to train. They still wanted community, but fuck, instead of parking my car in the garage, I'm going to park my glued ham bench and everything else in there. But then it's still this need to have some outside expertise that keeps you on point, keeps you accountable, and to just, instead of going into the, like, it can be so soul sucking to go into the gym. You're like, so do I squat today? Do I deadlift today? If I do squat or deadlift, is it high volume? Is it low volume? It's like, well, fucking hire a coach. And then you don't need to think about that. Like, tell them what your goals are, explain where you are today. They'll build a roadmap for you, and then you just get in and get the work done. So, yeah.
Decision fatigue is a thing, especially like
crazy.
Yeah, especially like if a lot of people work out after work, and like how many decisions do you make at work? And then when you get to the gym, do you just stand there and look around and go, what do I do now? Because you're just burnt out maybe mentally, instead of just pulling up your phone like, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing today.
Yeah, when I go to jiu-jitsu, they'll ask me sometimes like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh no, that's the wrong question. I'm here to just do jiu-jitsu, and you guys are in charge.
You let me know what I'm doing.
You let me know what I'm doing. Yeah, it's a relief to get that. Mm-hmm. And if folks struggle or they push back on whether or not they want to buy programming or coaching or whatever, like if you're just pushed to the max and you have goals that you're not meeting, find a coach. And the coaching could be in a variety of areas. If you're a real estate specialist and you're falling down somewhere, find a fucking coach that fills the gaps of where you are and where you want to go. Like, everybody needs a coach. And I've got coaches in multiple areas of my life, and it's not cheap. And I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. But I'm able to do that because I've really worked my ass off. And also, like, I drive an 8-year-old Subaru station wagon, and I decide to put resource allocation into things other than like giant house, super nice car. Like, those things are cool, but I prefer like personal development, because that actually feeds into my ability to be more effective and provide more value and ostensibly make more money. And also, I just enjoy my life more.
Yeah, I think coach in every facet of life. Anything that you want to get better at, like, that's my immediate recommendation. I used to be what you're talking about, the DIY guy, jack of all trades. And that was basically because my wife and I were in a lot of debt. I had no money. And then we turned that situation around. And so now if I want to get good at something, I know the easiest way to do that is to hire someone who's already been there,
right,
and shortcut that process to success as fast as I can.
Yeah.
And I think no matter what area of life that is, it holds true.
Yeah.
Now, I was stalking you on Instagram, preparing for this interview a little bit, and I did notice look like a squat rack inside of a garage. So, are you a garage gym athlete?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. And the cars get parked outside, and that's it, man. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your setup.
We have 6 horse stall mats that are remnants from the 4th CrossFit affiliate gym that was ever founded in 2004. They're still motoring along. We have just some upright squat racks that a buddy of ours fabricated. We have 400 pounds of bumper plates. We have kettlebells going from 20 to 100 pounds. We have some bands. We have a pull-up bar. We have rings. Out in front of our house, we have a rope, and we have multiple ring setups, rings for the kids, which the original rings that were used in the 4th CrossFit affiliate gym were dog chew toys. So
nice.
They're just circles,
yeah.
Chicken and beef flavor, because we wanted to give people options, but we still have those. And I just take my kind of rogue straps and I've hung those in the trees for my girls, and that's it. I'm probably going to get a selectorized dumbbell set just to I've always kind of wanted one of those. I don't want like a zillion dumbbells, but one of the like 5 to 100 pound selectorized dumbbell sets seems like a really cool add I might add something like a glued ham bench at some point. We have a sled that we drag, which the sled, I took another horse stall mat, laminated two 2x4s on the front of it with some bolts and eye bolts on it and a chain. Chain goes to a strap that goes to a belt. And I'll put weight on that and drag it around the property because that's kills really the smart. Weeds.
Yeah.
And so like I'm weeding while I'm dragging this sled around. And I figured that thing would get destroyed in no time. But these horse stall, you can tell it's been scratched, but this horse stall mat's going to last forever. I've been using it like that for 2 years.
And it's probably a lot quieter too. Like
it's super
if you're
quiet.
Like going on concrete, because that's something like I had a sled for a long time. I got rid of it recently when I moved, but I always like felt bad depending on what time I was working out, like pushing that on concrete around my neighbors. I didn't want to like. That's this
thing genius. Doesn't mess up your driveway, and like I just drag it through like our the stuff right next to our roadway and all that, where the weeds pop up and it just crushes them. And then our bedroom is big enough that I put out some jiu-jitsu mats there. My wife is getting close to being a blue belt; she's getting pretty good, but we'll do some jits there. Like the garage is just small enough, and with the girls riding their bikes in and out and everything, I've tried to put the jiu-jitsu gear in there also. And like before we know it, the cats and dogs have been all over it and everything, and so we just keep that in the bedroom. But that's my garage gym set up. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. And, how long have you had a garage gym? Because I know you had the affiliates and everything. So like, how long have you been doing that?
Man, the only time I haven't had one would be so I'll put it this way: we've had one since 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Continually since 2007. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. So, last real question of the show, because we have a lot of garage gym athletes out there listening to this, and we always like to end our podcast really just with the best advice so what would your best advice be for all the garage gym athletes out there listening? I mean, granted, we've talked about a lot of things. You could go nutrition, you could go specific fitness at home, like whatever you want. I don't care. Just what would your best advice be for them?
So folks tend to bounce around too much, whether it's nutrition, whether it's the training, modalities that they're using. What I would really recommend is people sit down and have a really honest assessment of what their goals are, because the goals define everything. It's kind of your future, it's your vision. And if you just want to be super lean and jacked, then figure that out. But when people start stacking multiple things on, and everybody would love to be both the Hulk and Thor and Wolverine, but it's like you got to kind of pick a direction, and so that goal really delineates things for you, and then do a very honest assessment of where you are. And again, if we know where we are, where we want to go, we have the potential for a roadmap to get there, and we can then set up a timeline, and we can retro-engineer from there. And I could want to be an NBA player. It's never going to happen, so that's possibly an unattainable goal. So be realistic, but swing for the fences a little bit. But if people would delineate goals and really not goals, but goal, then that is going to provide a roadmap for where they want to go. And I see so many folks not get anywhere because, again, they kind of get pulled in by the trends and the whims of social media, and wow, that thing looks good. And if you want to try something new, by all means do it, but do it in the context of a goal, because then you have a scientific process for assessing whether it was helpful or dog shit. And, it's like, we probably have one life, and you got one go at this stuff, and we're only getting older. And so get the biggest return on investment that you can out of that. And delineating goals is probably the biggest ROI that you'll ever get out of your whole life.
Awesome. Rob, well, I appreciate it, man. I really like that answer. It's been a blast talking to you. I appreciate your time as well. Thanks.
Honor being on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Super appreciate the work you guys do. It's awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. If you want to learn more, go to garagegymathlete.com. You can learn about our training. Let us send you a copy of our book, The Garage Gym Athlete, or you can even get featured on the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening.